What's up, everybody? Joe Brown here. This is the Heresy Financial Show, and apparently Gavin Newsom in California loves oil companies and gasoline and dirty, environmentally non-friendly fuels so much. He loves them so much that he's willing to subsidize people, give them free money in order to go buy more of this stuff. Yes, it is not a joke. Today, Governor Newsom is proposing an $11 billion relief package for Californians facing higher gas prices so that they can continue to sweep profits over to all those greedy oil corporate capitalists. Ready? Let's dive in. So this is one of the most hypocritical things that I've seen recently that just displays the incompetence and the lack of logic in economic policy today. It's in California right now, this is a big example, but it's nationwide and in many countries around the world right now. First, you have a massive push to demonize any company that is getting oil for you, getting gasoline for you, getting diesel for you. These are evil people, right? The people that get the stuff that literally make the world turn, but not just the energy. Petroleum products are basically every single thing that is created that you buy and use on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. It is impossible to have a lifestyle today. Even off-grid people, they use petroleum-based products in their day-to-day life. It is just not possible to get away from it. And so step one, for some reason, is to absolutely demonize these companies and these people that are literally creating modern life as we know it and making it possible. Demonize them. Say that they are ruining the planet. Say that they are destroying life, and say that they are the worst people ever for profiting off of this. So that's step number one, and we've seen a lot of that over the last few years. The next step is a regulatory and tax framework that actually makes lives of these people more difficult. Not just the mental thing of saying that they're the worst people alive and worst companies alive, but also making the laws and the taxes in a way that makes it more difficult for these companies to survive and to thrive. Again, these are the ones that make the world move and make all the stuff that everybody uses on a daily basis. But instead of making it easier or just hands-off approach, I'm not talking about subsidizing, I'm not talking about artificially supporting, I'm just saying let them do what they're doing and let people do what they do. And if it happens to be that people want their stuff, they're free to choose to do business with each other. They're free to buy oil, they're free to buy gas. Hands-off approach, right? But no, instead of that, we're going to make their life more difficult. We're going to make it more difficult for the world to get its hands on oil products. We're going to make it more difficult for the world to get its hands on gasoline and diesel, whether that's regulations, laws, or taxes. We're going to make it more difficult. Again, very pronounced in California, but it exists in the rest of the country and all over the world. So step one, demonize them. Step two, actually make it more difficult. And then step three, shocker, the supply goes down because new entrants can't come in because it's exceedingly difficult, and nobody wants to anymore because who wants to be demonized by the entire world? So you've got a lack of workers, you've got a lack of people, you've got a lack of investment, you've got a lack of funding, and you've got a lack of businesses entering into this, making it better. And instead, the ones that do survive are, it's a lower supply than it was before, and all you need is a shock, like, I don't know, the last 2 years, and have prices explode because it shuts down supply and sometimes in certain areas increases demand. Guess what happens to prices when supply goes down and demand stays the same or goes up? Prices are gonna go through the roof. This is economics 101. Nobody should be surprised at this, that the oil price is skyrocketing when you get a shock of supply and demand. Very basic. And then the most hypocritical thing has to happen, which we're seeing in California right now. They have to pass laws to subsidize the consumption because it's squeezing their people so hard that nobody can afford to live anymore. So they propose $1 billion relief package to literally give people $100 or $200 gift cards, I think maybe even $400 gift cards here. I'll put it up on the screen in order to be able to use that to be better able to afford gas. People with cars will get extra money in order to afford transportation. They're also going to make public transportation free for a while. Absolutely preposterous that you can posture yourself on a moral high ground to say anybody who buys oil, anybody who makes oil, anybody who buys gas or diesel and instead of electric is a demon, is bad, is hurting and destroying the world. And then you have to turn around and pay people to do more of it instead of, again, a hands-off approach and just saying, we were wrong, we're going to step out and then let the free market work itself out, and the prices will eventually get to a point where it either decreases demand or increases supply, and high prices are then able to fix themselves. Instead of giving a hands-off approach, instead you're going to throw fuel on the fire and give people more money to get those things to keep demand sustained, which will then drive prices even higher. This is what's creating populism today. This is what's creating a divide between the haves and the have-nots. These oil companies are not going to start increasing supply when they recognize, hey, the higher prices go, the more profits we get because you're giving them money. This is exactly what's happened with housing. This is exactly what's happened with healthcare. This is exactly what's happened with education. You put in all these laws and regulations that push up the price artificially of these things, and then when nobody can afford them, instead of just backing off and saying we screwed up, instead you give people money in order to afford them more, which makes the problem worse. It's absolutely preposterous, and the only inevitable result of this is not at some point that the government will recognize what they did wrong and back off and let everything go back to normal and crash where it's supposed to crash and pop where it's supposed to pop. Instead, what you're going to see is a nationalization of these industries because they're going to demonize them even further and say, in light of all the suffering and in light of all of the taxes that people have had to pay and in light of all the debt that the government has had to go into subsidize this industry, we're seeing a few people get insanely rich and insanely wealthy off this, and we're going to demonize them even though we created the problem, and we're going to stop it from being able to happen. We're going to nationalize these industries. We're going to take them over, and the result of that is make them less efficient, make the problem worse. But instead of then having a couple people get very, very wealthy and rich off of it, now you just have an inefficient industry that's managed very poorly, and now you have shortages. Meanwhile, you still have all the supply and demand imbalances as before. The problem didn't get better, the problem got worse. Absolutely ridiculous. We're probably going to see more and more and more of this. And as a side note, I always say inflation makes debt easier to pay off. This is related because everybody says the only way that happens, like if your debt load gets big and then you have inflation, you're not better off because your bills went up, but you still have all of the debt payments. The only way you're better off is if income goes up with that. And eventually inflation does work its way into increasing incomes. Now, it never really keeps pace for the average income, never really keeps pace with inflation. But the way that works out is if private wages do not keep up and you start to have the majority of the people get too squeezed, stuff like this comes in where you have subsidies. You have bread subsidies, gas subsidies, oil subsidies, transportation subsidies, water subsidies, rent subsidies, education subsidies, any subsidies possible that actually makes incomes go up. Because if the actual income doesn't go up because let's say it's a direct grant, that just allows you to not have to direct some of your income to that area. You can direct it to another area. So inflation does make debt easier to pay off over the long term because it always ends up increasing average incomes. Not compared to inflation. Inflation always outpaces it for the most part, but that fixed rate debt always stays the same at the old prices. So the increased income does make that old debt easier to pay off as long as you can stay solvent. And so this is an example of what will happen more and more, probably nationwide, probably globally, as these problems become more acute and we start to see little crashes and little evidence of coming recession and financial calamity start to unroll across the globe as a result of the mismanagement of this economy by the very fact that they were trying to manage it in the first place will continue, and we'll start to see more and more things like this. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.